The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the school's assembly hall, casting golden patterns across the polished wooden floor. National flags hung proudly from the ceiling beams. Photographs of national heroes adorned the walls, and rows upon rows of chairs had been meticulously arranged for this momentous occasion. This was no ordinary day at the École Nationale in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. Today was different from all the rest, marked by an atmosphere of heightened anticipation and barely contained excitement. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso, was personally attending the closing ceremony of the children's educational camp and training program. For weeks, students had been participating in activities designed to instill patriotism, discipline, and civic responsibility. The entire school buzzed with energy that crackled like electricity in the air. Children shouted slogans with passionate voices, their words echoing off the high ceilings. Others waved flags with vigorous enthusiasm, the colorful fabric snapping in the breeze from open windows. Some students stood in corners, quietly rehearsing their speeches one final time, moving their lips silently as they committed their words to memory. But amid all this commotion, all this jubilant noise and purposeful chaos, one figure drew everyone's attention like a magnet. A 12-year-old girl stood apart from the crowd, dressed in a military uniform that had been specially tailored for the occasion. Her black shoes gleamed with fresh polish, reflecting the afternoon light. Her hair had been pulled back tightly into a severe bun, not a single strand out of place. Most striking of all was the expression on her young face, an extraordinary seriousness that seemed far beyond her years, as if ancient wisdom had somehow found its way into a child's eyes. As she began her slow, measured walk toward the stage, the cacophony in the hall died down, first to a murmur, then to whispers, and finally to complete silence. Every eye turned toward her. Students craned their necks to get a better view. Teachers exchanged glances of curiosity and concern. Parents leaned forward in their seats. Everyone wondered the same thing. How could such a young girl, barely more than a child, carry herself with such confidence and gravity before this massive gathering? Her steps were firm and steady, each footfall deliberate. Her shoulders were squared with military precision. But if one looked closely into her eyes, those deep, dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets, there was something else. A mystery, a knowledge that nobody could quite understand. It was as if she carried a burden that no 12-year-old should have to bear. When she reached the stage and stepped up to the microphone, she stood perfectly still for several long moments. The silence in the hall became almost unbearable. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others held their breath. It seemed as though she was gathering her words from some deep place within herself, pulling them up from the very depths of her soul, preparing to speak truths that had been locked away in silence. Then, finally, her voice rang out clear and strong, filling every corner of the vast hall. "Honorable President," she began, her voice steady despite the hundreds of eyes fixed upon her. "We children are proud of your leadership. You have taught us that love for our nation is not merely a slogan to be chanted, but an action to be lived. We have learned that living and dying for our country is the greatest sacrifice one can make." The audience nodded approvingly. This was the kind of patriotic rhetoric they had expected, the sort of words that made adults smile with satisfaction. But then her tone shifted, becoming more somber, more personal. "However, I also want to say something else, something important that weighs heavily on my heart. Sometimes the enemy hides not beyond our borders, but within our own homes. They look like ordinary people. They dress like us, speak like us, smile like us. They engage in everyday conversations and appear to be just like everyone else. But their hearts and minds belong elsewhere. They laugh to deceive us. They speak kind words to mask their treachery. But one day their true faces are always revealed." The words struck the assembly like lightning. Children turned to look at each other with wide, confused eyes, trying to understand the deeper meaning behind their classmates' speech. Teachers sat frozen in their chairs, mouths slightly open in shock. Some of the adults in attendance thought perhaps the girl had gotten carried away, that she was simply being dramatic or reciting some rehearsed story that she didn't fully understand. After all, she was just a child. What could she possibly know about enemies and betrayal? But President Ibrahim Traoré's eyes narrowed as he listened. A strange intensity flickered across his face, an expression that those close to him recognized well. He was a man who had survived multiple coup attempts, who had risen to power in a country plagued by instability and threats, both external and internal. His instincts had been honed by years of navigating dangerous political waters. Those instincts, what some might call a sixth sense, were now screaming at him that something was wrong. These were not ordinary words. This was not just a child's speech. There was something more here, something hidden beneath the surface. He leaned forward slightly in his seat, his full attention now locked on the young girl. His mind raced with questions. Where had she learned these words? Who had taught her to speak with such specificity about enemies hiding in plain sight? Was this merely coincidence? An innocent choice of words? Or was there a hidden truth crying out to be heard? The president maintained his silence and composure, but internally, every alarm bell was ringing. He listened intently as the girl continued her speech. "Honorable President," the girl went on, her voice gaining strength even as tears began to glisten in her eyes. "We children dream that our country will always remain safe. We want enemies to never be able to infiltrate our midst. But if they do manage to get in, we must keep our eyes open. We must have the courage to speak the truth, even if that truth exposes our own loved ones." The hall fell into an even deeper silence than before. Every eye remained fixed on the young girl. For someone her age, these words were far too profound, too weighted with meaning. They spoke of painful choices and moral dilemmas that most adults never had to face. President Traoré felt his pulse quicken. An alarm was ringing in his mind, growing louder with each passing second. A voice inside him whispered urgently, "This girl knows something. This is not just a speech. This is a message." When the speech finally concluded, the hall erupted in thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, clapping enthusiastically. Teachers beamed with pride. Fellow students cheered. The noise was deafening, a celebration of what appeared to be a remarkable performance by a talented young speaker. But the president's expression remained serious, thoughtful. While everyone around him applauded, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small piece of paper and a pen. With quick, precise movements, he wrote something down, folded the paper, and discreetly handed it to a senior officer standing nearby. The officer read the note, his face becoming grave. He nodded once, sharply, and immediately left the hall through a side door. No one else in the audience noticed this brief exchange. They were all too focused on the girl, on the spectacle, on the ceremony itself. They had no idea that the president had just set something in motion, that wheels were beginning to turn, that lives were about to change forever. After the ceremony concluded, as children mingled and congratulated each other, the girl stood quietly in a corner. Friends rushed over to embrace her, their voices high with excitement. "You were amazing," they exclaimed. "How did you come up with such powerful words? You were so brave up there." But beneath the girl's outward composure, beneath the small smiles she offered her friends, there was a deep, gnawing fear, a sense that she had said something she shouldn't have, that she had opened a door that could never be closed again, that she had set in motion events that would bring a storm down upon her family. President Traoré, meanwhile, had already made his decision. As soon as he returned to his office, he would order comprehensive surveillance on this girl's family, particularly her father. His instincts were too strong to ignore. Something about those words, "The enemy hides in our own homes," felt deeply personal, deeply true. He had learned long ago never to dismiss such intuitions. As he left the hall, he cast one final glance at the girl. His expression was complex, a mixture of hardness and softness. Hardness, because he was prepared to take immediate action against any threat to his nation. Softness, because this innocent child might not even understand the danger she had exposed, the terrible truth her words had revealed. The festivities in the school hall continued for another hour. Children laughed and played. Parents mingled with teachers, discussing the impressive performances they had witnessed. But President Ibrahim Traoré wasted no time in making his way directly to the head of the security detail, a senior officer who had accompanied him from the Presidential Guard headquarters. His eyes held that same intensity that appeared only when he sensed internal threats to the nation. Leaning close so that no one else could hear, he spoke in a low but firm tone. "Keep watch over this girl's family, quietly. No commotion." Those words did not come from just a child's imagination. They are an echo of a truth that she herself may not fully comprehend. The officer nodded immediately, fully understanding the gravity of the situation. He gestured discreetly to his colleagues positioned around the hall. They all knew that the president's instincts were rarely wrong. This was not the first time Traoré had identified a significant threat based on seemingly minor details. A few words here, a suspicious gesture there. Time and again, his intuition had proven accurate, uncovering conspiracies and plots before they could mature into real danger. Meanwhile, after descending from the stage, the girl found herself surrounded by her classmates. Questions bombarded her from all directions. "Where did you get those words? Did you write the speech yourself? Why did you say such serious things?" The girl could only offer a small smile and lower her head, avoiding direct answers. Inside, however, a storm raged. She knew she had said something that should have remained unspoken. The weight of those words had been pressing on her heart for so long that they had simply burst forth, beyond her control. She had been unable to keep them contained any longer. Her father had not attended the ceremony. He had made the usual excuses about being too busy with work obligations. This was nothing new. He frequently missed family events, always claiming urgent matters required his attention elsewhere. But that night, when the girl returned home, she discovered something that made her blood run cold. She found her father in his study, frantically burning papers in a metal wastebasket. The acrid smell of smoke filled the room. His hands trembled as he fed document after document into the flames, his face glistening with sweat despite the cool evening air. The girl froze in the doorway, unseen. Her own words from earlier that day echoed in her mind. "The enemy hides in our own homes." Her father suddenly looked up and spotted her standing there. His face registered shock, then fear, before quickly rearranging itself into a forced, artificial smile. He hastily pushed the last few papers into the fire and turned to face her. "Daughter," he said, his voice straining to sound casual, "you looked very brave today. I heard you spoke well. The president must have been impressed." The girl remained silent, but her heart was pounding. Her father's nervousness was not normal. The fear in his eyes had been unmistakable in that brief moment before he had masked it. She knew then, with terrible certainty, that something was deeply wrong. His panic, the burning documents, his absence from the ceremony, it all pointed to something dark and hidden. That same night, President Traoré summoned his intelligence team to an emergency meeting at the presidential palace. Maps and classified files were spread across the large mahogany table in the secure briefing room. Present were the heads of military intelligence, domestic security, and his most trusted advisors. The girl's family, particularly the father, may have connections to foreign agencies, Traoré stated without preamble. "I want evidence gathered immediately, but this must be done quietly. No public spectacle, no leaks to the media. We cannot alert them that we are watching." His team immediately set to work. Within 24 hours, surveillance had been established. What they discovered in those initial days was troubling enough to justify deeper investigation. The intelligence agency's investigation into the girl's father began the very next morning. Multiple teams were assigned to the case, working in rotating shifts to maintain constant observation. They used a combination of physical surveillance, electronic monitoring, and financial analysis. What they found painted a disturbing picture. The target, whose name was Amadou Sankara, coincidentally sharing a surname with Burkina Faso's legendary revolutionary leader, though bearing no relation, was officially employed as a mid-level bureaucrat in the Ministry of Infrastructure. On paper, his job was unremarkable, reviewing construction permits, coordinating with contractors, attending routine meetings. His salary was modest, but sufficient for his family's needs. But the surveillance revealed a parallel life hidden beneath this ordinary facade. Sankara would leave his house late at night, often around 2 or 3 a.m. when the streets of Ouagadougou were empty and dark. He would drive to various locations, sometimes abandoned buildings, sometimes quiet parks, sometimes the parking lots of closed businesses. There, he would meet with individuals whom intelligence could not immediately identify. These meetings were brief, never more than 10 or 15 minutes. Packages or documents would be exchanged. Words would be spoken in hushed tones. Then the parties would separate and disappear into the night. The electronic surveillance proved even more revealing. Sankara used encrypted messaging applications on his phone, the kind favored by intelligence operatives and criminals who needed secure communications. He employed sophisticated techniques to avoid detection, changing SIM cards frequently, using VPNs to mask his internet activity, conducting sensitive communications only on public Wi-Fi networks, where the traffic couldn't easily be traced back to him. Financial investigators discovered that over the past 3 years, Sankara had made multiple trips abroad. He had visited Ghana, Togo, and Côte d'Ivoire, neighboring countries that were not unusual destinations for West African travelers. But the investigators noted something suspicious. These trips had no clear purpose. Sankara had not been sent abroad by his employer. He hadn't visited family. His relatives all lived in Burkina Faso. He hadn't attended conferences or training sessions. The trips appeared to serve no legitimate function whatsoever. Moreover, his lifestyle showed subtle signs of additional income. He drove a car that was slightly too expensive for his official salary. His daughter attended a good but costly private school. The family's home, while not ostentatious, was in a nice neighborhood that should have been beyond his means. When investigators added up the numbers, they discovered a significant gap between what Sankara should have been able to afford and what he actually spent. All of this evidence was compiled into detailed reports and presented to President Traoré. The president reviewed the documents carefully, his expression growing darker with each page he turned. "He appears to be an ordinary government employee on the surface," Traoré said to his intelligence chief. "But the connections are dangerous. The behavior pattern is consistent with an asset working for a foreign intelligence service. However, we cannot move yet. We need more concrete evidence. We need to understand the full scope of this network. If we arrest him now, we catch one fish but let the rest escape. I want the entire net." His orders were clear. Continue the surveillance, gather more evidence, but do not interfere. Let the target believe everything was normal. Give him enough rope to hang himself and reveal his accomplices. As the days passed, subtle changes began occurring within the Sankara household. Though the girl and her mother couldn't understand the reasons behind them, Amadou Sankara became increasingly irritable and short-tempered. He snapped at his daughter over minor issues, a dropped spoon at dinner, a slightly lower grade on a math test, talking too loudly when he was trying to concentrate. His wife, Fatoumata, noticed that he seemed constantly on edge, jumping at unexpected sounds, checking the windows repeatedly as if expecting unwanted visitors. One evening, Fatoumata gathered the courage to confront him. She waited until their daughter had gone to bed, then found him in his study, staring at his computer screen with bloodshot eyes. "Amadou," she said softly, "what's wrong? You haven't been yourself lately. Are you involved in something dangerous, something that could put our family at risk?" For a moment, she saw fear flash across his face, genuine, raw terror. But then his expression hardened. He stood up abruptly, towering over her. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice cold. "Everything is fine. Stop asking questions." He walked past her and slammed the study door shut, leaving Fatoumata standing alone in the hallway, her heart pounding with dread. At school, the atmosphere around the girl began to change as well. Whispered conversations would stop when she approached. Some students treated her like a celebrity, seeking her friendship and attention. Others seemed uncomfortable around her, as if proximity to her might somehow contaminate them. Teachers looked at her with mixture of pride and concern. Some people in the community began speculating about her speech. Was it just a story? Some asked. Or did she know something real? Why would a child use such specific language about enemies hiding among us? The girl herself became increasingly withdrawn. The bright light that had always shone in her innocent eyes began to dim, replaced by worry and confusion. She couldn't shake the image of her father burning documents. Couldn't forget the fear she had seen in his face. President Traoré, receiving regular updates on the surveillance, found his thoughts returning again and again to the girl's words. We must have the courage to speak the truth, even if it exposes our own loved ones. Those words had become something of a mission statement for him. He was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be, no matter whose lives might be destroyed in the process. The security of the nation had to come first. In the intelligence headquarters, activity intensified. The next morning brought fresh developments that transformed suspicion into near certainty. Agents observed Amadou Sankara meeting with a man named Umaru Diallo, someone who had previously worked at a foreign embassy in Ouagadougou. Diallo had officially retired 2 years earlier and now claimed to operate a small import-export business. However, intelligence had long suspected him of maintaining his intelligence connections. The meeting took place in a crowded market, where surveillance would be difficult, but where hidden cameras had been strategically positioned weeks earlier as part of ongoing security measures. The footage captured Sankara and Diallo sitting at a small tea shop, apparently engaged in casual conversation. But at one point, barely visible to the cameras, Sankara slid a small USB drive across the table. Diallo palmed it smoothly, dropping it into his pocket without breaking the flow of conversation. 20 minutes later, as they prepared to part ways, Diallo passed a canvas bag to Sankara. The exchange was smooth, practiced, the kind of handoff that comes from experience. Later, when agents managed to obtain a partial look inside a similar bag during a subsequent meeting, they identified its contents: bundles of cash in foreign currency, not West African CFA francs, a sophisticated encrypted communication device, and what appeared to be technical specifications for something. The full details remained unclear. This evidence was immediately reported to President Traoré. His suspicion hardened into conviction. The enemy was indeed very close, embedded within the very fabric of everyday life. Continue to remain silent, he ordered his team. I need the complete network. Capturing just one man accomplishes nothing if we don't reach his handlers, his fellow operatives, the entire chain. We must be patient, even though every instinct tells me to strike now. His officers accepted these orders, though some chafed at the delay. They wanted action, arrests, justice. But they trusted their president's strategic thinking. He had proven his wisdom too many times for them to doubt him now. The surveillance continued, growing more sophisticated. Technical experts successfully cloned Sankara's phone, allowing them to read his encrypted messages in real time. What they discovered was damning. Sankara had been communicating with handlers using code phrases that seemed innocuous to casual observers but carried clear meaning to those trained in intelligence work. Messages about shipments referred to classified documents. Client meetings meant dead drops where information was exchanged. Business opportunities signaled upcoming military movements or government activities that were supposed to be secret. The investigators constructed a timeline going back 4 years. They discovered that Sankara had been recruited gradually. At first, he had been approached by what seemed to be a businessman interested in construction contracts, someone who offered him small bribes to expedite paperwork. Nothing unusual in a country where corruption was endemic. But these initial transgressions had been documented, photographed. When Sankara later tried to distance himself, he had been blackmailed with evidence of his own wrongdoing. From there, the recruitment had deepened. Sankara had been given greater access to classified information through his position. What had started as minor corruption had evolved into full-scale espionage. He had been passing information about military installations, troop movements, security protocols, government communication systems, and political developments within the administration. All of this intelligence was methodically building toward a comprehensive case that could be prosecuted in court. But President Traoré wanted more. He wanted the entire network exposed. While intelligence operatives worked tirelessly to build their case, the girl found herself trapped in an increasingly unbearable situation. She could no longer ignore what was happening around her. At school, she noticed strange men in the playground and near the gates, men who weren't parents, who weren't teachers, who had no apparent reason to be there. They dressed casually, trying to blend in, but she recognized them for what they were, watchers. The president's intelligence operatives maintaining surveillance on her and her family. When she went to the market with her mother, she spotted the same men following at a discreet distance. They never approached, never threatened, but their presence was unmistakable to someone who was now paying attention. One evening, consumed by doubt and fear, she approached her mother in the kitchen. Fatoumata was preparing dinner, mechanically chopping vegetables with a vacant expression that suggested her mind was elsewhere. "Mother?" the girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are we ordinary people, or is there something about our family that makes others suspicious of us?" Fatoumata's knife clattered to the cutting board. She turned to look at her daughter, her face pale. For a long moment she seemed frozen, unable or unwilling to speak. The girl could see knowledge in her mother's eyes, knowledge and pain and fear. But Fatoumata said nothing. She simply turned back to her vegetables and resumed chopping, her movements now jerky and irregular. The silence was answer enough. The girl retreated to her room and pulled out her diary, the one place where she could be honest about her feelings. She wrote, "I think something terrible is happening. I think my words at the ceremony weren't just words. I think they were truth, and I think that truth is about my own father. I don't want this to be real, but I can feel it in my bones. The way he looks at me now, with fear and anger. The way he jumps at every sound. The way he's always checking his phone, always nervous. What have I done? What have my words started?" That same night, intelligence reported new developments to the president. Sankara had arranged a clandestine meeting at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, in an industrial zone that had fallen into disrepair after several businesses had failed during the economic downturn. A full surveillance team was deployed. Night vision cameras were positioned on nearby buildings. Listening devices were planted in strategic locations. Agents disguised as homeless people and night workers took up positions in the surrounding area. At exactly 11 p.m., Sankara's car pulled up to the warehouse. He looked around nervously, checking to ensure he hadn't been followed, then slipped inside through a side door that hung partially off its hinges. The cameras captured everything that happened next. Inside the warehouse, 6 other men were already waiting. They sat around a makeshift table, really just a wooden pallet balanced on cinder blocks. Maps and documents were spread across its surface. As Sankara joined them, one of the men, clearly the leader, began briefing the group. Though the audio quality was poor due to the cavernous space and echo, intelligence analysts were able to enhance it enough to make out key phrases. Military convoy, new security protocols, vulnerable access points, transmission schedule. President Traoré watched the footage in real time from his secured command center. His jaw tightened as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. This was not just one man passing information. This was an organized cell, a coordinated espionage network. "This is the moment," he said to his assembled commanders and intelligence chiefs. "This is where we discover the truth behind the innocent words. But we still wait. Let them proceed with their meeting. I want to identify every single person in that room before we move." Facial recognition software went to work, running the captured images through databases of known intelligence operatives, suspected foreign agents, and persons of interest. Within hours, preliminary identifications began coming back. The results were shocking. Of the 7 men present at the warehouse meeting, 5 had definite connections to foreign intelligence services. 2 had previously worked at embassies before being expelled from Burkina Faso for suspected espionage. 3 others had traveled frequently to countries known to operate aggressive intelligence operations against West African nations. But most damning was the discovery of what they were planning. Using the documents visible in the surveillance footage, combined with intercepted communications, intelligence analysts pieced together a disturbing picture. The network had been passing information to a foreign power that was interested in destabilizing the Traoré government. They had provided details about military readiness, locations of weapons stockpiles, schedules of presidential movements, and weaknesses in the national security infrastructure. This information could be used for everything from planning a coup to coordinating terrorist attacks. More immediately, the intelligence revealed that the network was planning a specific operation. They intended to intercept a shipment of military equipment that was arriving next week, steal sensitive communications devices, and replace them with compromised equipment that would allow foreign intelligence services to monitor Burkina Faso's military communications in real time. President Traoré realized that time had run out. They could wait no longer. The threat was immediate and credible. He gave the order, "Prepare for a raid. We move tomorrow night. I want every member of this network arrested simultaneously. No one escapes. No one gets a chance to destroy evidence or warn their handlers. Operation Truth begins now." Throughout the next day, preparations were made in secret. Special Forces teams were briefed on their targets. Arrest warrants were prepared. Prosecutors readied their cases. The timing had to be perfect. Simultaneous raids on 7 different locations across the city. Meanwhile, oblivious to the trap closing around him, Amadou Sankara went to work as usual. He ate breakfast with his family, kissed his daughter on the forehead. She flinched slightly at his touch, though he didn't seem to notice, and drove to his office at the Ministry of Infrastructure. The girl, watching him leave, felt tears streaming down her face. She knew, somehow she just knew, that something terrible was about to happen. Her innocent words had set events in motion that could not be stopped. At school, she couldn't concentrate on her lessons. Teachers had to call her name multiple times to get her attention. At lunch, she sat alone, picking at her food without eating. Friends approached to talk, but she waved them away, wanting only solitude. That afternoon, she went to the school's small chapel, a quiet space used by students of various faiths for prayer and contemplation. She knelt there, her hands clasped, and whispered into the silence. "God, if my father has betrayed our country, give me the strength to accept it. If my words have exposed a truth that needed to be told, then help me bear the pain that comes with it. But please, please, let me be wrong. Let this all be a terrible mistake." But in her heart, she knew there was no mistake. The truth was exactly what she feared it to be. At precisely 10 p.m., Operation Truth commenced. 7 teams of Special Forces operatives, each consisting of 12 highly trained soldiers, moved into position around their respective targets. They wore black tactical gear, carried automatic weapons, and communicated through encrypted radio channels. Supporting them were intelligence officers who would handle the technical aspects of evidence collection. The primary target was the abandoned warehouse where the network had held their meeting. Intelligence confirmed that another gathering was scheduled for that night. Apparently, a final planning session before their operation against the military shipment. At 10:15 p.m., all teams reported ready. They waited for the final authorization, the words that would transform them from observers into actors in this unfolding drama. President Traoré, watching multiple video feeds from the command center, saw the targets converging on their meeting points. He saw Amadou Sankara arrive at the warehouse, park his car, and nervously check his surroundings before entering. He saw the other conspirators take their positions inside. "All teams," the president said into his microphone, his voice calm but filled with authority, "you are authorized to proceed. Execute Operation Truth." Within seconds, the raids began simultaneously across the city. At the warehouse, Special Forces breached through 3 different entry points at once. Flashbang grenades disoriented the conspirators inside. Before they could react, before they could destroy evidence or reach for weapons, they were surrounded. "On the ground! Hands behind your head! Do not move!" The soldiers' voices echoed in the cavernous space. The conspirators, caught completely by surprise, had no choice but to comply. Within 90 seconds, all 7 men were in custody. Hands secured with zip ties, faces pressed against the dirty concrete floor. Amadou Sankara, lying on the ground with a soldier's boot on his back, felt the weight of his failure crushing down on him. This was the end. Everything was over. His career, his freedom, his family, his life, all destroyed in an instant. Evidence collection teams moved in immediately, photographing everything, bagging documents, securing electronic devices. They found the conspirators' planning materials, detailed maps of military installations, schedules of equipment deliveries, technical specifications for communication systems, and perhaps most damning, stacks of foreign currency, payment for their treachery. Similar scenes played out at the 6 other locations. One by one, the network members were captured. Some tried to resist and were subdued. Others attempted to flee and were chased down. A few went quietly, seeming almost relieved that the charade was finally over. By midnight, the operation was complete. The entire network was in custody. At the presidential palace, Traoré watched the final reports come in. His face showed no triumph, no satisfaction, only the grim resolve of a leader who had done what was necessary to protect his nation. "Begin the interrogations," he ordered. "I want full confessions. I want every detail of how they were recruited, who they worked for, what information they passed, and what other operations might be ongoing. Leave nothing uncovered." The news reached the Sankara household just after midnight. Fatoumata was awakened by a loud banging on the front door. When she opened it, she found 2 police officers standing there. Their faces professionally neutral but not unkind. "Mrs. Sankara," one of them said, "we need to inform you that your husband has been arrested on charges of espionage and treason against the state. He is currently in custody at the National Intelligence Headquarters. You may contact a lawyer if you wish." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her legs buckled and she grabbed the doorframe for support. Though she had suspected, though she had feared, having it confirmed in such stark terms was overwhelming. "There must be some mistake," she whispered, though she knew there wasn't. "My husband is just a government worker. He's not a spy." "This is impossible." The officers said nothing. They had delivered their message and had no comfort to offer. After a moment, they turned and left, their footsteps echoing in the quiet street. Fatoumata closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down to the floor as sobs racked her body. How had it come to this? How had the man she married, the father of her child, become a traitor? In her bedroom, the girl had heard the knocking and the voices. She crept out of bed and peered down the hallway, seeing her mother collapsed on the floor, crying. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She already knew. She returned to her room and buried her face in her pillow, her own tears flowing freely. Her father was a traitor. Her words had exposed him. Her family was destroyed. Everything she had feared had come true. The next morning, the news exploded across Burkina Faso. Radio stations interrupted their regular programming with special bulletins. Newspapers rushed out special editions with banner. Headlines: "Major Spy Ring Broken" and "President." "Thwarts Espionage Network" and "Most." Prominently, "Child Speech Leads to Arrest of Traitors." The story of the 12-year-old girl who's innocent. Words at a school ceremony had inadvertently exposed. Her own father became the talk of the nation. Some praised her as a hero, a patriot who loved her country more than her own family. Others felt deep sympathy for the impossible position she had been placed in, the terrible burden she now carried. At school, the girl arrived to find reporters gathered outside the gates. Cameras flashed in her face. Microphones were thrust toward her. Voices shouted questions. "How did you know your father was a spy? Do you feel responsible? Are you proud of what you did?" Teachers rushed out to shield her, ushering her inside the building and away from the media circus. But even inside, she couldn't escape the attention. Students stared at her. Some approached to offer awkward words of support. Others kept their distance, unsure how to relate to someone whose life had become so dramatically unusual. She sat through her classes in a daze, unable to focus on anything the teachers said. Math problems, history lessons, language exercises, none of it seemed to matter compared to the catastrophe that had engulfed her life. The trial of Amadou Sankara and his co-conspirators began 3 weeks later at the High Court of Ouagadougou. The proceedings were declared matters of national security, but in a gesture toward transparency, President Traoré ordered that they be broadcast on national television. The people had a right to see justice being done, he declared, and to understand the nature of the threat that had existed in their midst. The courthouse was surrounded by security forces. Armed soldiers stood at every entrance, checking identification and searching bags. Inside, the gallery was packed with journalists. Government officials, military officers, and ordinary citizens who had waited in line for hours to secure seats. When Amadou Sankara was led into the courtroom in handcuffs, A collective gasp went through the crowd. He looked haggard, as if he had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. His hair had grayed at the temples. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His shoulders slumped with the weight of his defeat and shame. The chief prosecutor, a stern woman named Aminata Ouedraogo, stood to present the government's case. She was known throughout Burkina Faso as a fierce advocate for justice, someone who had prosecuted corrupt officials and criminals with equal vigor. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom, "the evidence we will present demonstrates beyond any reasonable doubt that the accused engaged in systematic espionage against the nation of Burkina Faso. Over a period of 4 years, Mr. Sankara provided classified information to foreign intelligence services, compromising our national security and putting countless lives at risk." She proceeded to lay out the case methodically, piece by damning piece. Documents were presented showing Sankara's communications with his handlers. Photographs depicted his clandestine meetings. Financial records proved he had received substantial payments from foreign sources. Video footage from the warehouse raid showed him in the company of known foreign agents. But the most dramatic moment came when the prosecutor played the recording of the girl's speech from the school ceremony. The courtroom fell absolutely silent as her young voice filled the space. "Sometimes the enemy hides within our own homes. They look like ordinary people. But one day, their true faces are always revealed." Several people in the gallery wiped tears from their eyes. The judge himself appeared moved. Amadou Sankara, forced to listen to his own daughter's words condemning him, though she had not known at the time what she was doing, lowered his head and wept openly. "These words," the prosecutor said, "spoken by an innocent child, proved to be prophetic." They alerted President Traoré to investigate more closely, and through that investigation, this entire network was uncovered and dismantled. The defense attorneys tried their best to mount a challenge, arguing that Sankara had been coerced, that he had been trapped by circumstances beyond his control, that he deserved mercy. But the evidence was overwhelming. The facts spoke for themselves. After 2 weeks of testimony and deliberation, the verdict was delivered. Guilty on all counts, Amadou Sankara and his co-conspirators were sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Some received 20 years. Others, including the network's leaders, received life sentences without possibility of parole. As Sankara was led from the courtroom for the final time, he cast one agonized glance toward the gallery, as if hoping to see his wife and daughter there. But they were not present. They had chosen to stay away, unable to bear the spectacle of his disgrace. In the weeks following the trial, President Traoré made the decision to publicly honor the girl whose words had inadvertently uncovered the spy network. A special ceremony was organized at the presidential palace, attended by government ministers, military commanders, religious leaders, and hundreds of citizens. The girl was driven to the palace in an official car, accompanied by her mother. Fatoumata held her daughter's hand tightly as they were escorted through the ornate halls. Despite her husband's betrayal, she had been treated with respect by the government. Officials understood that she had been an innocent victim of her husband's crimes, not a participant. The palace's grand reception hall had been decorated with flags and flowers. A podium had been erected at the front, and rows of chairs filled the space. When the girl entered, the entire assembly rose to their feet in applause. The sound was deafening, overwhelming. President Traoré himself came forward to greet her. He knelt down so that his eyes were level with hers, a gesture that surprised many in the audience, as it showed a degree of humility unusual for a head of state. "Young lady," he said softly, so that only she and a few nearby people could hear, "you have done your country a great service. I know the cost has been high for you personally. I know you have paid a price that no child should have to pay. But you must understand that your courage, your willingness to speak the truth, has saved lives. That network was planning operations that could have killed people. Your words stopped them." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. President," she whispered, "I didn't know. I didn't mean to—" "I know," he said gently. "You spoke from your heart. You spoke the truth without knowing how true it was. Sometimes that is the purest form of courage." He stood and led her to the podium. The audience fell silent, waiting to hear what the president would say. "My fellow citizens," Traoré began, his voice booming through the hall, "we are gathered here today to honor extraordinary courage." This young girl stood before me and spoke words that seemed innocent at the time, words about enemies hiding among us, about the importance of truth even when it costs us dearly. I listened to those words, and something within me recognized their importance. Her speech led to an investigation that uncovered a serious threat to our national security. He paused, letting his words sink in. Some might say it is tragic that her own father was among the conspirators. Some might say she should have remained silent, should have protected her family above all else. But I say to you, this child showed us the true meaning of patriotism. Love of country does not mean blind loyalty to family. It means loyalty to truth, to justice, to the greater good of all our people. The applause that followed was thunderous. People stood and cheered. The girl, standing beside the president, felt overwhelmed by the attention. Part of her wanted to run away, to hide from all these eyes upon her. But another part, a stronger part, stood firm, accepting the weight of what had happened, accepting her role in this drama. President Traoré continued, "I am announcing today that this young lady will receive a full government scholarship for her education, from primary school through university. She will want for nothing in her pursuit of knowledge. Additionally, I am ordering that her story be incorporated into our national curriculum. Every student in Burkina Faso will learn about her courage, about the importance of speaking truth, about the reality that threats to our nation can come from within as well as from without." More applause. The girl felt her mother's arm around her shoulders, felt her mother's tears on her cheek as Fatoumata embraced her. Later, in a private moment, the president spoke with the girl again. "I want you to know," he said, "that you did nothing wrong. You could not have known what your words would reveal. But even knowing what you know now, even understanding the consequences, I believe you would still speak those same words, because they were true, and truth is always worth speaking no matter the cost." The girl nodded slowly. "Mr. President," she said, "I wrote something in my diary. I said that if my words saved the country, then I could accept the pain they caused me. I still believe that. But it doesn't make the pain less." "No," Traoré agreed. "It doesn't. Pain is pain, regardless of its purpose. But you are stronger than you know. You will carry this burden, and you will grow from it. And one day you will look back and understand that you were part of something larger than yourself." In his cell at the maximum security prison outside Ouagadougou, Amadou Sankara sat on his narrow bed and stared at the concrete wall. He had been allowed one possession from his former life, a photograph of his daughter taken on her 10th birthday. In the picture, she was smiling, her whole face lit up with joy. He remembered that day. They had gone to the park, eaten ice cream, flown a kite together. It seemed like a lifetime ago now. How had he gotten here? How had a man who loved his daughter, who had once been a patriotic citizen, become a traitor? He thought back to the beginning, to when he had first been approached by the recruiter. It had seemed so innocent at first, just accepting a small payment to expedite some paperwork, to look the other way while certain construction permits were approved. Everyone did it. Corruption was endemic in government. He had told himself it didn't matter, that it wasn't really hurting anyone, but then they had shown him photographs, evidence of his corruption. They had told him that unless he cooperated further, they would expose him, ruin him, send him to prison. What choice did he have? He had a family to support, a reputation to protect. So he had taken the next step. And then the next. Each time he told himself it would be the last time. Each time he promised himself he would find a way out. But there was never a way out. The trap had closed around him year by year until he was so deep in it that escape was impossible. He had never meant to betray his country. He had never wanted to be a spy, but intentions meant nothing now. The consequences of his actions were what mattered, and those consequences were devastating. And now, the crowning irony, his own daughter had been the instrument of his exposure. Her innocent words, spoken in good faith at a patriotic ceremony, had triggered the investigation that led to his arrest. Did she hate him? He assumed she must. How could she feel anything but hatred and disgust? He had betrayed not just his country, but his family, his daughter's trust, everything he should have held sacred. In quieter moments, though, he felt a strange sense of pride beneath the shame. His daughter had shown more courage and integrity in one speech than he had shown in years of cowardice and compromise. She had spoken truth while he had lived a lie. Perhaps in exposing him, she had saved him from himself, saved him from sinking even deeper into betrayal. He picked up a pen and paper. Prisoners were allowed to write letters, though he doubted his would be delivered, and began to write to his daughter. "My dearest child, I do not expect you to read this. I do not expect forgiveness. But I need to write these words, even if only for myself. You spoke the truth at that ceremony, and your words destroyed me. But they destroyed only what deserved to be destroyed. I was living a lie, and you brought that lie into the light. For that, strange as it may seem, I thank you. You are stronger and better than I ever was. You have the courage I lacked. I am proud of you, even though I have no right to such pride. I hope you will have a good life, a life free from the darkness that consumed me. Your father, who failed you, but who loves you still." He folded the letter and put it away, knowing he would never send it. Some truths were too painful to share, even in writing. 6 months passed. The immediate furor died down, though the girl remained something of a celebrity in Burkina Faso. Newspapers still occasionally ran stories about her. Teachers pointed to her as an example of civic virtue. Younger children looked up to her with admiration and awe, but the girl herself was struggling. The trauma of what had happened, the betrayal, the exposure, the destruction of her family, had left deep scars. She had nightmares about her father, dreams where he called out to her for help while she stood frozen, unable to move. She woke up crying, her sheets soaked with sweat. Her mother noticed the signs of distress and arranged for counseling. The girl began meeting twice a week with a psychologist, a kind woman named Dr. Traoré, who specialized in helping children process trauma. "What you're feeling is normal," Dr. Traoré told her during one session. "You experienced something that would be difficult for anyone to process, let alone a child. You feel guilt even though you did nothing wrong. You feel responsible for your father's imprisonment, even though he brought it upon himself through his own choices. These feelings are understandable, but they are not accurate reflections of reality." "But if I hadn't given that speech," the girl began, "then the spy network would still be operating," Dr. Traoré interrupted gently. "Then your country would still be vulnerable. Then other people would have been hurt. You cannot blame yourself for speaking the truth. Your father's choices were his own. His consequences are his own to bear." Slowly, painfully, the girl began to accept this. She started to understand that while she felt responsible, she was not actually responsible. There was a difference between being the catalyst for something and being its cause. At school, she gradually reconnected with friends who had been unsure how to relate to her. She joined the debate club and discovered she had a talent for argumentation and persuasive speaking, perhaps not surprising, given how her one speech had changed so many lives. She threw herself into her studies with renewed focus, determined to honor the scholarship the president had given her. Her relationship with her mother grew deeper and stronger. Fatoumata had filed for divorce from Amadou, a difficult but necessary step in moving forward with their lives. The two of them, mother and daughter, became a team, supporting each other through the difficult days. "We are survivors," Fatoumata told her daughter one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. "What happened to us was terrible, but it did not destroy us. We are still here. We are still together. And we are stronger than we were before." The girl leaned against her mother's shoulder and felt, for the first time in months, a sense of peace beginning to take root in her heart. President Ibrahim Traoré used the incident to launch a broader anti-corruption and counterintelligence initiative. He gave speeches throughout the country about the importance of vigilance, about the reality that threats could come from within as well as from without. "We must love our families," he told audiences at rally after rally. "But we must love our country more. We must be willing to put the good of all above the comfort of a few." This young girl showed us how that is done. She did not want to expose her father. She loved him, but she loved truth more, and that love of truth saved us all. The educational curriculum was revised to include ethics lessons focusing on the girl's story. Students across the country read about her speech, discussed its implications, and grappled with the difficult questions it raised. What do you do when loyalty to family conflicts with loyalty to country? How do you speak truth when truth will hurt people you love? When is it right to keep silent, and when is silence itself a form of betrayal? These were not easy questions, and there were no simple answers. But the very act of asking them, of forcing young people to think seriously about ethics and duty and patriotism, had a profound effect on the national consciousness. Foreign intelligence services, meanwhile, took note of what had happened in Burkina Faso. The exposure and dismantling of the spy network sent a clear message. Operations in this country had become more dangerous, more difficult. President Traoré's government was alert, competent, and willing to act decisively against threats. Several planned operations were quietly canceled. Assets were withdrawn. The intelligence threat level against Burkina Faso decreased significantly. In this sense, the girl's speech had accomplished even more than anyone realized at the time. It had not only exposed one network, but had helped prevent future networks from forming. The deterrent effect was substantial and lasting. 1 year after the trial, the girl received an unexpected delivery. A prison official arrived at her school with a letter that had been cleared by security authorities. It was from her father. She held the envelope in trembling hands, staring at her name written in her father's familiar handwriting. Part of her wanted to tear it up unread. Part of her was desperate to know what it said. Finally, in the privacy of an empty classroom after school had ended, she opened it and began to read. The letter was not long. Her father wrote about his daily life in prison, the routine, the monotony, the endless hours with nothing to do but think. He wrote about the other prisoners, some of whom had shown him unexpected kindness. He wrote about the prison chaplain who visited weekly and who had been helping him confront his guilt and seek some form of redemption. But mostly, he wrote about her. "I want you to know," the letter said, "that I am proud of you. I know I have no right to feel pride. I forfeited that right when I betrayed my country and my family. But I feel it nonetheless. You did what I could not do. You chose honor over comfort, truth over loyalty, courage over fear. You are everything I should have been and was not. Whatever pain I caused you, whatever damage I did to your life, I hope you will not let it define you. You are destined for great things. You have already accomplished more than most people do in a lifetime. Do not let my failures hold you back. Rise above them. Rise above me. Become the person I know you can be." The letter ended with a simple phrase: "I love you, and I am sorry." The girl read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face. It didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the pain or undo the damage, but it helped. Knowing that her father understood, that he acknowledged his failures, that he still loved her despite everything, it helped. She carefully folded the letter and put it in her backpack. She would keep it, she decided. Not to dwell on, but as a reminder that even people who do terrible things are still human. A reminder that life is complex, that morality is sometimes murky, that good people can make catastrophic mistakes, and most importantly, a reminder that speaking truth, no matter how painful, is ultimately an act of love. 5 years passed. The girl, now 17, stood once again in a large hall giving a speech. But this time, she was not a frightened 12-year-old stumbling into truth. She was a confident young woman standing at her high school graduation, having been selected as valedictorian. "When I was 12 years old," she began, her voice steady and clear, "I gave a speech that changed my life. I spoke about enemies hiding among us, about the importance of truth. I didn't know then how true my words were, or how much they would cost me. But I learned something from that experience, something I want to share with all of you as we prepare to leave this place and enter the wider world." She paused, looking out at the audience, her classmates, teachers, family members, and officials, including, she noticed, President Traoré himself, who had quietly taken a seat in the back row. "I learned that truth is not always convenient. It is not always comfortable. Sometimes truth destroys things we love. Sometimes it breaks our hearts. But truth is the foundation upon which everything else must be built. Without truth, there is no trust. Without trust, there is no community. Without community, there is no nation. My words 5 years ago hurt me deeply. They tore my family apart, but they also saved lives and protected our country. And given the choice to go back and remain silent, to protect myself from that pain, I would not do it. Because some things are worth the pain. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. As we leave here and enter the world as adults, she continued, we will face many such choices. Moments when staying silent would be easier, when telling the truth will cost us something precious. In those moments, I urge you to remember, we are not isolated individuals. We are part of something larger. Our choices affect others. Our silence can harm just as surely as our words can heal. Choose truth. Always choose truth, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. As she finished, the hall erupted in applause. President Traoré was the first to stand, followed immediately by everyone else in the audience. The ovation lasted several minutes, wave after wave of appreciation and respect. Later, at the reception following the ceremony, President Traoré approached her. They had met several times over the years. He had taken a personal interest in her education and development, seeing her as a symbol of the kind of citizen he wanted to cultivate in Burkina Faso. Another powerful speech, he said with a slight smile. You have quite a gift. I learned from the best, she replied. You've shown me what leadership looks like. What it means to make hard choices for the right reasons. You are going to the university in the fall? He asked, though he already knew the answer. He had personally ensured her scholarship covered all expenses. Yes, Mr. President, I'm studying political science and international relations. I want to understand how nations work, how to prevent the kind of betrayal my father engaged in, how to build systems that are resilient against internal and external threats. Traoré nodded approvingly. Your father would be proud, he said quietly. I know that may sound strange given everything that happened, but I received a letter from him recently. He wrote to me asking about you, wanting to know how you were doing. I wrote back and told him about your accomplishments. He wrote again, and the joy in his words was unmistakable. He may have failed as a citizen and as a father in many ways, but his love for you never failed. The girl felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. Have you considered pardoning him? He's been in prison for 5 years now. He's not a threat anymore. The president's expression grew serious. I have considered it, he admitted. The law requires him to serve 20 years, but I have the power to reduce his sentence. However, I must balance mercy with justice, personal sympathy with public necessity. What message would it send if I pardoned traitors after just a few years? What would that do to deterrence, to the rule of law? I understand, she said. I wasn't asking you to do it. I was just wondering if you'd thought about it. I think about it often, Traoré said. Perhaps in a few more years, when enough time has passed that mercy won't seem like weakness. But I want you to know this. Whatever I decide about your father's sentence, it has nothing to do with you. You have proven yourself 1,000 times over. Your father's crimes are his own. His redemption, if it comes, must be his own as well. 10 more years passed. The girl, now a woman of 27, had completed her university education with highest honors, earned a master's degree in international relations, and returned to Burkina Faso to work in the government's foreign affairs ministry. She had become one of the country's youngest diplomats, representing Burkina Faso at international forums and negotiations. She had also written a book about her experience, titled The Weight of Truth, A Daughter's Testimony. It had become required reading in schools throughout West Africa and had been translated into multiple languages. She donated all proceeds to educational charities. One morning, she received a phone call from the office of the president. Amadou Sankara had been granted clemency after serving 12 years of his 20-year sentence. He would be released the following week. The news sent a shock through her system. She had known this day might come, but knowing and experiencing were two different things. For 12 years, her father had been an abstract presence, someone who existed in letters and memories but not in real life. Now he would be real again, physical, present. Did she want to see him? She honestly didn't know. She called her mother, who had remarried several years earlier to a kind man who treated both mother and daughter with gentleness and respect. "It's your choice," Fatoumata said. "He is your father. Nothing that happened changes that biological fact. But you owe him nothing. If you want to see him, see him. If you don't. Either choice is valid." The girl, the woman, spent several days wrestling with the decision. Finally, she decided she would meet him, but on neutral ground. Not at home, not at the prison, but at a small cafe in the city center. On the appointed day, she arrived early and sat at an outdoor table watching the street. She saw him before he saw her. An older man, hair now completely gray, walking slowly as if unsure of his steps. Prison had aged him. He looked like he was in his 60s, though he was barely 50. When he spotted her and their eyes met, he stopped walking. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the distance of years and pain and betrayal and forgiveness, or the beginning of forgiveness, at least. Then he approached and she stood, and they faced each other awkwardly, neither sure what to do. Finally, she extended her hand. He took it, his grip gentle, tentative. "Hello, father," she said. "Hello, daughter," he replied, his voice breaking on the last word. "Thank you for seeing me." "I didn't think you would." They sat down. For the first hour, conversation was stilted, painful. They talked about superficial things, the weather, the city, how it had changed. Gradually, though, they worked their way toward harder subjects. "I read your book," he said. "They allowed us to have books in prison. I read yours 3 times. What did you think?" she asked. "I think," he said slowly, carefully, "that you told the truth. You showed great courage in writing it, in being so honest about your feelings, the anger, the pain, the betrayal, but also the complexity of it all. You didn't make me into a monster. You showed me as a human being who made terrible choices. I'm grateful for that." "You're not a monster," she agreed. "You're a man who made mistakes. Terrible mistakes with terrible consequences. But still human." They talked for 3 hours. She told him about her life, her work, her hopes for the future. He told her about his time in prison, how he had used it to reflect, to educate himself, to try to become a better person, even though he could never undo what he had done. As they prepared to part, he asked, "Is there any chance, in time, that you might forgive me?" She considered the question seriously. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've forgiven you for hurting me personally, but I don't know if I can forgive you for betraying our country, for putting so many lives at risk. That forgiveness isn't mine alone to give. It belongs to all the people who were harmed by what you did." He nodded, accepting this. "That's fair. That's more than fair. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For all of it. And that despite everything, you turned out magnificently. You became someone I could never have imagined. Someone far better than I ever was." As she walked away from the cafe, she felt a complex mixture of emotions. Peace, but also sadness. Closure, but also lingering pain. She realized that this was what healing looked like. Not a perfect resolution, not a happy ending, but a real ending. An acknowledgement of what had been lost and what remained. An acceptance that some wounds never fully heal, but that life continues anyway. That night, she added a final entry to her diary, the same diary she had kept since she was 12 years old. "Today I saw my father for the first time in 12 years. It was hard, but it was also necessary. I learned that forgiveness is not a single moment, but a process, maybe a lifelong one. I learned that you can acknowledge someone's humanity without excusing their actions. I learned that truth. Speaking it, facing it, living it is sometimes the hardest and most important thing we can do. My 12-year-old self spoke words she didn't fully understand, but those words were true. The enemy does hide among us. Truth does come at a cost. And courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what's right despite the fear. I have paid a high price for my words. My family was destroyed. My father went to prison. My childhood ended abruptly. But I would speak those words again, because they saved lives, because they protected my country, because they were true. And in the end, truth is all we have. Everything else, comfort, security, even love, can be built on a foundation of truth. But without truth, everything eventually crumbles. I am at peace with who I am and what I did. And that, I think, is the greatest achievement of all. The end this story, while fictionalized, reflects the real challenges faced by nations dealing with internal security threats and the personal toll such situations take on families. It reminds us that patriotism sometimes requires difficult choices, that truth-telling is an act of courage, and that even innocent words can have profound consequences when they illuminate hidden realities.